Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Triangulation, episode 138, recorded February 3rd, 2014. Alex Lindsay. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we get some of the most interesting, smartest people on the internet. We get to sit down and spend an hour with them. And when I say we, I mean you and me, because you can watch us do this Triangulation show live now at our new time, Mondays, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 2100 UTC. Your chat room questions will feed into the show. And today I bet you have a lot of questions because it's somebody who is a longtime friend of Twit. Mr. Alex Lindsay is with us today. Hi, Alex.
How you doing?
Gosh, this is great.
It's very odd to be in this role.
You do a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
So to be on the other side, I know they did this to me a couple of months ago, and it was very uncomfortable. So, but there's so much. I mean, I think piecemeal. If you watch Macbreak Weekly, where Alex is a regular, you watch the Macbreak videos. You saw him on Call for Help and the Screensavers, and I think those of you who've been watching Alex for all these 15 years probably feel like you know a lot about him. But and you can piece it together. But we've never really had a chance to sit down and just talk about your life story, and I think a lot of your very interesting ideas, which you and I have talked about sitting in airports in Vancouver and
exactly
places. So I'm thrilled to get you on here. This is great. When did we first meet?
We met, I think it was 2003. I think it was the summer of 2003. It might have been 2002. 2002 or 2000. It might have been 2002.
We had you on Call for Help, right?
On Screensavers.
We had you on Screensavers.
Yeah, we had it. There was a Pixcore member that worked at Tech TV. And he said they're always looking for people. Yeah. You ought to go on.
Yeah.
And I remember they sent me like a tape to kind of get a sense of what the show was like, because I didn't in San Francisco, of course, couldn't see it. And so I watched it, and I was like, oh, 7 minutes, that's going to be really difficult. So of course I practiced for like 2 days.
And you were doing Photoshop?
It was I think in that one it was how to do a camera projection mapping, what we use for matte painting at ILM for Star Wars.
Wow.
And I think it was with Patrick. I think that I did the first one with, but I practiced it over and over and over again. And I think what was funny is I look back at that, and there was so much time spent on that 7 minutes, and I really couldn't have anyone interrupt me because there was only enough time. And by the end of it, I was done. Well, no, but I was done. But by the end of doing them with you, years later.
You didn't plan at all.
No, I definitely did. But I'd only planned for 3 or 4 minutes instead of
Leo
7.
Interrupts a lot.
Well, and it just made a better conversation. I slowly learned. But
and you did Call for Help a lot. We actually, I think at one point said, well, Alex will be Call for Help and Burt Monroy will be the Screensavers, so that there wouldn't be overlap, which was dumb, but that's just how we did it. And then you came up to Toronto and did Call for Help many times up there with me, and that was really fun.
It was fun because you go for a day, and do 4 episodes, and then yeah, that was good.
I owe you for a lot of free content, I got to say.
Oh, it was definitely worth it.
So, what is Pixel Core? I think this is probably the #1 question people ask.
It's so it's kind of hard to explain, but it's the Pixel Core really looks at the idea of a digital guild, and it really looks at the craftsmen's guilds of the, literally the 12th century, 13th century, when they were building all these castles and cathedrals, where you could, it's not that you had thousands and thousands of employees, but at any one time, if someone wanted to create a project, people could self-organize because there was a set of standards, there was a pecking order, there was a process, everyone knew each other in some way, shape, or form. And that really hasn't existed anywhere since then.
You had trade guilds, so if you were a mason, you would become an apprentice to a journeyman mason who would teach you the ropes. You would learn your way up to journeyman, then master mason. And these standards were enforced by a guild.
Right.
If you earned journeyman, you were capable of certain quality work, and everybody knew it.
Right.
If you were a master mason,
and we have a lot of those names now, but we don't really. I mean, they're not really meaningful. They're not meaningful, and so the question was, how do we? And the way I look at digital production, and producing computer graphics and video and and so on and so forth, is it's much closer to a craft than it is to a liberal arts degree.
It's neither an art nor a science. It's a craft. I like that.
And it really is. I mean, I think that it's a craft. I started doing it when I was 10 years old, and so for me, I didn't have to go to college for it. It was something that you learned very organically, and so the Pixel Corps is really this experimentation on how we recreate that, and
to help people get up to those levels, to have some certification involved, help people find work, help find work for people, all of that,
and create I guess what I would call a network of trust, of making it easier for people to hire people, easier for to get hired, so on and so forth, because that a lot of times is what's missing. I think that, and I think that there's a huge industry, there's a huge growth coming for digital media.
Right.
I think that when you look at where we're going, video, it used to be that you had to have a website. It got to a point by the late 90s that everybody had to have a website. Then you had to have a website with images by, in the early 2000s. And now you pretty much have to have a lot of video, and that pressure is only going to become more intense.
And video is a lot harder to make, say, than text or audio. I mean,
it is. And right now it's very expensive because the cost because we do consider this like a liberal arts education, that you have to spend $200,000 on your education to learn how to be. I mean, I think that
is that a fair?
Well, but I think that a lot of people think that when they think that they kind of clump together digital media production in the kind of thing that you would go to college for.
Right.
And I think that
do colleges even teach that?
Not well most of the time.
Yeah.
There are a handful of colleges and a handful of instructors,
perhaps.
and trade schools. Yeah, and trade schools do the best they can at figuring that kind of stuff out. There's not a lot of great places to learn it right now, and so part of what we're constantly experimenting with is how to clump that together. There's great kind of self-starter things, things like FX PhD and lynda.com and Cineversity, and these are all like great online resources, but there's not a guide and a certification process that really helps employers or helps other people, get involved with that. And so the Pixel Corps is, really trying to figure that out, and it's a mixture of, it is a mixture of production. It is a mix, because we do a lot of production,
right?
But it's also a,
it's training, and
well, I kind of felt like you couldn't do training if you weren't doing production, because the production's constantly changing.
Right. Now that's a good point too. That's one of the reasons schools have a hard time keeping up, is the skill set is completely different.
We tend to refer to it as becoming institutionalized.
Yeah. By the time it's written in stone, it's no good anymore, because that's not what anybody's doing.
Which is why we're not looking for certification from the government, because when the process of getting certified means I have to slow down my curriculum to such a level that it's not useful anymore, because the software that I said I was going to use is no longer the software that we need to use, that kind of thing.
So you said you started at 10. What were you doing? Were you drawing?
Not really. I learned how. My grandfather had a TRS-80, so my grandfather was a real geek. So what did
he do for a living?
He was a lawyer.
Like your dad?
Like my dad, and my grandfather was a lawyer. Like his father was a lawyer. And,
were you slated to become a lawyer? Or
yes, it was a very upsetting thing for my family. The firstborn, the oldest was always Alexander Lindsay back into the 12th century.
You're kidding?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in the end of the 12th century, Alexander de Lindsay told William the Longshanks that he would go find William Wallace. And then he showed up at Falkirk with William Wallace.
Wow.
And then that's how we lost all of our English land. So anyway,
and they had to move to Pennsylvania or somewhere.
Well, we spent another couple hundred years in Scotland, and they said, you need to leave now. And so then we went to Ireland, and then they said, you need to leave now.
And these were all originally de Lindsay's,
there's a lot of
Lindsay's.
Alexander Lindsay is a very old name in the family.
And, and a lot of barristers going back a few generations.
Barristers, troublemakers, that's what we do. We've been causing trouble for a couple centuries.
So Grandpa had a Trash 80.
Well, before that, though, I mean, to kind of put it in perspective, because I think it was a really formative thing for me, is to have, there was a handful of people. I mean, my uncle Sid was an engineer, and I spent a lot of time with him, constantly building stuff and figuring stuff out. Mechanical engineer for a medical supply company, but my grandfather built a crystal radio set in 1921 to get the first commercial broadcast from KDKA, which is in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, and so he picked that up, and he started doing ham radio before the licensing. I mean, like he was, when they said they grandfathered them in, they grandfathered him, and he had a 1100 watt.
Well, that's powerful.
Yeah, you know, it's like a 100-foot antenna. Like when he popped on and said CQ, 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 he just kind of cleared the
quiet.
Yeah, kind of cleared the airwaves. But so he so I grew up with him, you know, teaching me how to solder, and you know, so when I was a kid, you know, always building stuff with him.
So that was the physical stuff.
A lot of the physical stuff, and you know, that's what you would get from my grandfather as a crystal radio set. With my uncle, you would get mechanical engineering things as gifts for Christmas and everything else, but my grandfather had, you know, was always into the whatever was new, and so this brand new fangled personal computer called a TRS-80.
This was
1980, 80 or 81.
And yeah, that's.
And I learned how to program BASIC on it. And then
how old were you? 10?
I was 10.
Yeah.
And then the Apple IIe came out.
So you're probably the first. You're what? How old now? 45?
I'm 40. I don't know how old I am. 40. I'm 43.
I'm thinking you're
43.
the first generation of people who could actually have grown up with computers, not from birth,
right,
but from the age where it would make any difference.
Yes. I mean, and I was my uncle, who wasn't the engineer, had the TI, you know, so the
calculator,
the calculator. So there was a lot of time when I was even younger playing.
And you were fascinated by those.
Fascinated by those,
yeah.
You know, and really interested in computer graphics even back then. I mean,
really?
For me, the first thing I was doing is trying to program to draw pictures on the computer.
So it wasn't 10 go to 20 go to 10. It was
you know,
like logo, like mouse left 1 4.
Yeah, draw a pixel here, because everything back then you're drawing
hand.
pixels by hand, you know, and so the Apple II came out, Apple IIe came out, and I remember it was $2,000, and I went on a hunger strike because my dad wouldn't get it. I just stopped eating for like 3 days and cried and laid on the thing, just talking about it, and my dad finally capitulated and bought the computer, and
wow.
And then
he's given you a career.
Yeah, I mean, and I spent literally every, you know, hour outside of school, you know, programming.
So it's interesting. You weren't drawing on pencil and paper, but you were using the computer to create graphics.
Yeah, and I still have to admit that while I'm a computer artist, I mean, I can draw a little bit, but I'm really not a, you know, a talented hand. You know, I've been drawing with a computer since I was, you know, 12 essentially.
Right.
So I don't really, you know, and so I'm good at that, thinking about it that way. I'm not as good at doing it with my hand.
So as you grew up, did you study this stuff in school, or was school just no use at all for you? You were kind of wild.
Yeah, no, I was definitely, I was a little out there.
Was it rural where you were growing up?
Oh yeah.
Okay. In the country.
We're not. You know, we prefer not to be referred to as rednecks. We're Appalachian Americans.
Really?
No,
you grew up in the Appalachians?
Oh, yeah, Pennsylvania. So we grew outside of Pittsburgh, but where I grew up.
See, Pittsburgh, I think of a big city. I think of Steel Town, but no, you get
35 minutes out and you can't see another house from your house.
Yeah.
You know, and so our driveway was a half mile long. You know, you grew up in an environment where, you know, I had my own gun by the time I was 10. And when I look back at that, it was just...
It's normal.
It was normal, but I could never imagine allowing my kids to just run out in the backyard with a gun. You know, like now, like when I'm at 44.
It's a different time.
40, 43.
It's a different time.
And I worked on a farm. You know, I was like one of the kids. My grandfather had a farm.
Farm kids learn to drive when they're 10.
Oh no, we were driving the trucks around.
Drive the tractors, the trucks, yeah.
The tractors were easy because you could drive them from one place to the other without really any trouble. By the time you were 10, you really had to wait until you were 12 because you couldn't reach the pedals. You couldn't get the clutch. You could reach the gas, but until you were 12, you couldn't really because if you sat on a phone book, you couldn't reach the clutch to push it down.
Right.
And of course it's a farm truck, so
it's a challenge because you can either use the clutch or look out the window, but you can't do both.
And you got really challenging because like, you know, the clutch was so loose in the farm trucks that you had to kind of swish it around like this, and then you push it in and throw it. You know, kind of throw it into where it needed to go. You know, so it was but it was an interesting mix of being between this kind of farm life that was part of the day, and then coming home and programming on my computer.
Well, and I'm trying to put these threads together into the person that you became. But what's interesting is in 1980, none of what you do today existed really.
Right.
So it wasn't like you could prepare for what you were going to do for a living.
No, I don't think so. But
what was your first job?
I guess the first thing that I got paid to do was actually work on the farm. So,
Okay.
but very little. Like I worked a whole summer. My grandfather gave me $20, and I realized this is the wrong business for me. You know, it was just like, you know, this is like I do not.
$20 and a bushel of peas.
You know, and especially after in August, where you know August
It's a lot of work. That's hard work.
Is unloading hay bales, you know,
That's
in
hard
hot
work.
in hot barns.
No,
and
but your
so,
first digital work.
So my first digital work. So I worked. I did. You know,
And how did you get into it?
when I got out of I was just constantly programming
Right.
and constantly working on this, but that was all hobby.
Right.
I mean, it was just a really intense hobby. My first job out of high school was working at a place called R&M Electronics, and I worked in. I literally got a job at shipping and receiving for minimum wage, and but it was an electronics company, and they let me. You know, I was precocious.
Right.
And so they let me start to learn how to solder, and they let me work on. And back then, we were working on mainframes, which you walked into, and so you'd learn how to wire stuff and work on different lines and so on and so forth. And so that was a really good experience. And then I really stayed in that kind of physical production area, not so much the coding. You know, no one really thought of you as 18 coming out of high school as someone that was going to code for them. So I worked on that, and then my other job was actually so the other thing that, you know, all of my hobbies all end up being my jobs, but I was a heavy kid. I'm still a little heavy kid, but I was a heavy kid in high school, or in grade school, and then I got really into weightlifting. So by the time I was 18, I was pretty big. Most, in high school.
Muscly big.
Yeah, I mean, in high school I
Did you
was.
play football? Or?
I did. I was a nose guard and center, which was kind of.
That's a tough position.
At 175 pounds, it's pretty unforgiving.
Yeah.
But I was pretty strong, and so I was because I lifted 2 hours a day.
Football's serious in that in that part of the country.
It
High
is.
school
It is. Now I
football's
was
very big.
I will say I don't think I would have been competitive so the public high school I went to. I don't think I would have been. I wouldn't have even gotten on the team, you know, at 175 pounds. I went to a prep school in Philadelphia. And so for prep school, I was big enough to.
You were tough.
I was much tougher than, you know. So that was a little bit more forgiving.
And at this point, your family's still thinking lawyer. He's gonna be a lawyer.
Oh yeah. No, I was. I think my family definitely had figured that I was gonna end up being a lawyer. And then
when did you tell them?
Well, my life became a little bit more sidetracked. So my girlfriend in high school got pregnant. And so and of course when we were dating, I said, oh, you know, if you get pregnant, you know, we'll figure it out. But you know, I'm going to Yale. You know, like this is what's gonna what's gonna have to happen.
Right.
And then she got pregnant, and of course I was just like, okay, we need to get married. So we got married.
See, I didn't know this.
We got married in high school.
Wow.
And so, which is, I'll tell you, being in high school married is very odd. Yeah. Just in case you're wondering. The cool little side, just a little note.
My
you can write
wife is in the first period math. I just want to say, wow.
So it was my senior year, and so it was only a couple months of that. But and you know it didn't end up working out. Obviously, you know.
Yeah.
Obviously,
it's a bad age to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it turns out it is. But which is funny. What's funny now, I trade emails with her because she's building math programs for. So I'm into e-learning, but she's actually building the math programs for the city of Baltimore School District.
That's
neat. So we trade technical
great.
notes, you know, back and forth.
So that stymied the college.
Well, it slowed it down, and then the problem was I wasn't that interested in going to college.
Yeah.
And so
so many people who've sat in that chair have said that.
Yeah, I was just kind
You
of
remind me so much of Tim Jennison, who's the guy who started NewTek and TriCaster. Very similar backgrounds. And so many people say, you know, college wasn't going to offer me anything that I needed.
Well, and at first I thought it would. So I took a term off, you know, because of all the stuff that was going on, and I was working at the electronics firm, and then I went to Penn State, one of the local campuses, and I started in actually electrical engineering because I figured I was still kind of in the lawyer.
Useful. Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to be a patent lawyer, you know, and so. And I started in electrical engineering, and electrical engineering was fine, but I found myself more drawn to psychology. And so I started taking psychology courses, and my major wasn't really like, I didn't decide I was going to be a psychology major. I looked at all the courses I wanted to take, and then I would change my major so that I'd be allowed to take those courses. You know, like I would just kind of move around.
That's a smart thing to do.
Like
It
I would
doesn't
just
get you a degree in the long run,
but
but it's a great way to learn what you want to learn.
Yeah, and so then and so I got into psychology, but I was like, I really like philosophy.
My son's
more.
doing that right now.
Right,
He's
right,
changed
exactly.
his majors 4 times because he wants to take different classes.
And so then I moved to, then I started going to philosophy, and I really like philosophy, but I didn't like Western philosophy, so then I mostly focused on Eastern philosophy.
I've always thought of you as a philosopher more than anything else. I don't know if people know that about you.
Well, that was the thing I was most comfortable in. So then I mostly got into studying Eastern philosophy, and which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
And
you have quite an eclectic worldview. And, you know, to know the engineering, but also to understand psychology, to have a deeper philosophical thinking about what's going on, all of this stuff is unique, I think.
I guess, you know, I think that it's, I guess I you know, I grew up in a very, you know, I grew up in a family that was, that like, for instance, religion and philosophy and science were all kind of melded together. So, you know, I grew up Swedenborgian, which was a very, it's a very different religion.
It's a Christian church.
Christian church.
But it's, are they Swedish? Where are they from?
The person who wrote the original
Swedenborg.
Well, Swedenborg was Swedish, Emanuel Swedenborg, and he was a scientist. In fact, he was the national scientist, I believe, for Sweden.
Interesting.
And then just started writing all this stuff about heaven and hell and all these other things. And so
there was a sense of intellectual curiosity when you were growing up, and
yeah, and there was no separation between science and religion because it was all just seen as interactive.
Interesting.
And so you didn't really think about that. So I think that was also helped as a child really guide me towards, you know, thinking about both of them as
cross-disciplinary.
Yeah, it was not like either or.
Yeah.
You know, and so so I thought that was useful. And
that explains
it's
something.
also why Eastern philosophy was so comfortable, because it's so Swedenborgianism and Buddhism is so closely intertwined that it was, you know, very simple.
And not super doctrinaire, not
It's not
it's kind of easy going.
Easy going to some degree.
Easy going religious.
Exactly.
So when did you kind of see where your path was taking you? When did you kind of guys think, oh, or did you have that epiphany?
Well, I definitely had what I was always. I think I was always interested in what I was, you know, interested in. You know, I think that I definitely was very interested in computer graphics, very interested in video, very interested in, but I also very interested in philosophy. You know, there was always this thing that I was really interested in trying to figure out. As I got older, I went to, you know, I took all these different courses, you know, trying to, you know, I would go and take weekend courses and 1-week courses and, you know, retreats, and trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life, you know, when I was in my late teens, early 20s.
This reminds me of Steve Jobs did the same thing, really.
There was just like this huge exploration of all these different ideas.
I want to learn everything. I want to.
How does everybody look at the world?
Right.
What do I, you know, because I definitely felt like I wanted to have an impact. You know, I wanted to do something.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to just kind of make a living, you know, and so one of the courses I had, they said you have to, you know, create your you know, your mission statement. Like, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Like something that is big enough that you could live into for the rest of your life. And so my statement was a global conversation where no one's left out.
Wow, that's prescient, because of course until the internet came along, that wasn't even doable.
Yeah, it was. Well,
but that's what you're doing right now.
Well, and definitely what we do now, you know. And,
isn't that interesting?
And that was in 1992.
A global conversation where no one is left out.
Right. And that's actually the mission statement for the Pixel Corps when we started it. But it was easy. It was easy to figure out the mission statement because I'd already had it for 10 years.
Right.
So the
wow, that's great.
And so everything folded into what that needed to, what would serve that. You know, and I had this idea of, you know, people be able to talk to each other all over the world. And I have to admit that I also had some experience with the internet, or something like the internet, in the 80s, because my father ran for Congress, and the Republican National, my dad was Republican. I don't know if he is now, but he was at the time. And but in the 80s, the Republican National Committee had an online thing you could log into and get all the information that candidates have to have. And so I was very used to the idea of gathering huge amounts of information. It was like my big cheat sheet for school, because I could get all this information that wasn't in the library. Because back then, you know, so to me, you know, the internet was or online was very useful, because you could always go up there and get information you couldn't get anywhere else, you know. And so you could see where it was going to go.
So did you think that global conversation would be over online?
Yeah, no, I definitely had, because I was already on the not CompuServe, but AOL and
Genie,
and
CompuServe,
Prodigy. You know, so I was already using those, and so the idea of tying it together, and you could see that video was going to be the next thing, and you could see, I mean, I could see it anyway. It was so it was all like it wasn't there yet, but you knew that eventually that was what we were going to get to. And I, you know, you watch Star Trek, you get an idea.
Yeah, all you have to do is watch Star Trek. You see tablets, video, everything.
And so so I was.
Did you want to work in that business, or did you want? What were you thinking you might want to do?
Well, I just wanted to.
Politics?
All I knew is I wanted to create stuff. I was not that interested in politics. I found it to be inefficient.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as far as a person, the amount you can get done as a politician to
it's
me
designed to be that way.
Seemed very. It would take a long time to do anything.
You and I are both too impatient to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like,
we're in a hurry.
Well, and my family ran a lot of campaigns, and so I think the other thing is I had a very jaded view of you know, like I used to. I mean, my grandfather wanted to have a highway built between Pittsburgh and where we lived, and spent 44 years campaigning to have it done. And by the end of it, he was one of the more influential people in the political community because he had all these connections that he had created to create a highway.
Did he get the highway in the end?
It's the Alexander H. Lindsay Highway.
Wow.
You know, it goes, So,
but it was 45 years in the making.
Yeah.
You don't have time for that.
No, but I do think that it's very hard to do anything useful in less than 20 or 30 years.
So what's your grand scheme then? Your grand plan? So what? And 1 hour is not nearly enough to find out all of the stuff we want to know about Alex Lindsay. But and some of it, I'm assuming people understand that you're the half of what we do here is your recommendation. You're a video genius. You're a digital artist. You're a 3D creator. Pixel Core. We've talked about your work in Africa, where you're teaching people in Rwanda how to use these digital tools. You're creating a whole marketplace there for digital artists. So I think people understand the parts of that, but there must be a larger global strategy.
Well, I think that all of the stuff for me is
what ties it together.
The thing that ties it together is that I think that there is a transformational opportunity that's connected to having everyone be able to
global conversation.
That no one's left out. It's the idea when everyone understands each other and when everyone's actually able to talk to each other, and everyone's able to interact that way, that it changes. In some ways, it could change the way what it is to be human. You know, like because we suddenly understand these things in a whole different way. It accelerates that process. And I think there's just a lot of people being left out right now of that conversation. And so how do we keep on including them? So when you look at what we're doing in Rwanda, Rwanda is generating a business around, you know, an industry around media production. But what the ancillary effect of that industry is that a lot more people will have access to the media, you know. And so when we're putting, you know, in Rwanda, as
not to watching TV, but to making it
and to interacting with each other and being part of it. I mean, having the same access that we have here, where we're tweeting pictures and video. When when we're on G+ or Twitter or Facebook, you know, we're, you know, the acceleration of our togetherness in some ways, you know, is something that is very useful, but we need to keep on including more and more people in that conversation.
I think we've gotten to the point now where people understand something's happening and things are changing, and the human experience is changing dramatically, right in front of our eyes. But what you're saying, and I guess people aren't maybe as aware of this, is it's not available to everybody.
Right.
Is it just in the first world? Are developing nations left out?
Well,
it seems
a lot
to
of
me
developing
India
nations are jumping onto it as well. But how do we get it to a point where that literacy of not just tweeting and Facebook, but that literacy of being able to tell your story online and be able to tell your story to everyone and be able to show these things in a meaningful way? The access to those tools, the access to those skills, those things are still, even in the United States, I would say, you know, rare.
That's true.
You know, and so
we hang out with people who know how to do it.
Right.
But there's still a lot of people who don't know how to, the majority probably.
And there's an increasing amount of power in being able to do that well. You know, being able to tell those stories.
Should everybody be able to do that?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think that I would argue that more importantly, I know we've seen a big push on code. You know, everyone has to learn how to code.
Yeah, this is the new thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure that everyone needs to learn how to code, but I am certain that I do think that it's important for people to, in the future, to be successful, to be able to express themselves at least with graphics and video and so on and so forth, because I think that more and more they're going to have to be able to that's how you're going to engage everyone, you know. And it doesn't mean that they all have to be able to do that, but I think life will be easier for those who can. You know, I think that's the issue is that you look at, you know, the creators on YouTube or people who are creating, you know, websites or whatever, being able to visually express yourself and create, you know, even understand how it gets done so you know how to produce it, I think is important if you're going to start a business or you're going to be even successful. I think that, you know, employment, especially in the first world, and especially in the United States, is going to become more and more challenging because of the efficiencies created by technology.
We used to say that everybody has to learn how to write, how to put together a written, you know, an essay or whatever. It sounds like that's been superseded by everybody knows how to be able to create digital content.
Well, I think that digital content...
That's how we express ourselves now.
I guess I would say that that has to be part of that puzzle. Being able to write and, being able to build a great keynote presentation about, like, if it was me in schools, I'd be focused on those students instead of doing a research paper, creating a great slide presentation that really explains how all these things work together and be able to really... Because in many ways, I think it's easier to write than to create a meaningful graphic that has someone really understand the process.
Right. You have a lot of interesting ideas about education.
We're experimenting with it, a lot of it. I mean, I think that...
What's wrong with education the way we do it now?
Well, I think the biggest problem with education right now is that it's run by people who are good at it. You know, I mean, I think that you know, education is designed and run by people who are good at school. You know, and it
teaches other people to be good at school, is what it's teaching you.
Yeah. So if you're good at school, it works well. Unfortunately, most of us, you know, weren't very good at school. We don't, you know.
And what do you get? A bunch of people who are good at school is not necessarily the end goal we should be going for.
Well, and I think that it is you know, it's. I think that we aren't taking advantage of technologies as much as we could. You know, I think that there is in schools. I mean, you know, I don't think that we need 40,000 physics teachers teaching the same thing. You know, I think that we can make videos of that and make it really good and have the teachers then answering questions. It's not that we get rid of teachers. It's just that when we're talking about momentum or Pythagorean theorem or whatever, why don't we invest in a lot of, you know, creating a great video that shows that and then follow up and support the students that are having trouble, but allow the other students to move faster. You know, I think that...
You told me this years ago, and I thought, oh, that's nice, but it'll never happen. But the latest educational, and it's too bad because they do kind of run in fads, but the latest fad is called flipping the day, where instead of going home and doing homework, the kid goes home and watches that lecture.
Right.
And then comes to school, and that's when the real teaching happens. They do their homework in school with the teacher, with other students.
Right.
That's the social thing. Watching the lecture, why are you doing that in school? You could record it and have the perfect lecture, and that's it.
Exactly.
And so schools are actually addressing this. This is called flipping it.
And they're starting to get there. I mean,
I think it's a great idea.
I think it is. And I think that when we look at where, you know, and again, I think that also drives a huge demand for media production and everything else, because, you know, I think we're going to get to a point where we expect to see video training of almost everything. You know, when you buy a new car, you're going to be able to expect to, with the little screen, go, you know,
my car, I was so surprised, has help videos. Help videos in the car.
Yep.
Like, I'm going to watch those while I'm driving down.
Well, but if you're sitting there going, like, how do I turn the hazards on?
Right.
You want me to just say, how do I turn the hazards on, and a video plays on how to do that?
Yeah.
Or when I buy something new from IKEA, I should get a video and an animation of how to put that thing together.
Yeah, why that paper book? That's not the best way to do that.
You know, but I think that in 10, 15 years, I think that won't be something that we're talking about now. That'll be something you expect.
Yes.
Like they are way behind. It's like going to an old website, you know, or something like that. They're going to seem very quaint.
And that's why these digital skills are such valuable skills, because there's going to be a huge demand for this.
Well, and we have to decide whether we do it here in the United States or we do it somewhere else. I mean, but if we don't invest in teaching students that, you know, it'll just be done somewhere else. I mean,
and the government of Rwanda knows this. This is, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Here you have, I don't know, the country has some natural resources?
Not a lot.
So limited natural resources.
The government of Rwanda is focused on becoming a knowledge-based economy. I mean,
it's the smart thing.
Yep.
It's low polluting. You can train your people, and it's something that's great demand.
Yep.
But what do you need? You need infrastructure. You need internet.
So they got fiber everywhere. They got LTE coming to 95% of the country in the next 3 years. They have, you know, so they're focused on getting that all sorted out. Then they have, what they need is people who can understand how to produce media, which is why we're there working with them. And so we've got almost 40 students right now. We'll have 200 by the end of the year. We'll have probably 2,000 in 4.
Presumably those students go on and teach others too. I mean,
that's the goal. Our goal is right now we have a lot of folks. Ryan Ewell, who was, we worked with us. He's down there running parts of the production, and we have a.
That's really neat.
But we're teaching right now. Our goal is the students in the next 3 to 5 years will take over almost all the instruction.
So when the LA school district spends $30 million to buy an iPad for every student in the school district, that's a good thing?
I think it is. I mean, I think that the students need in my opinion, need a more personalized experience of school. I think, we're experimenting with a lot of different ways of teaching in Rwanda. It's easier to experiment there,
sure.
Ironically.
Of course.
And so one of the things that we're looking at is getting rid of grades, both grades A through F, but also grades 1 through 12, which is that our long-term goal as we start to look at this, and if we may even get to start experimenting with K through 12, is the idea that a student has, let's say, X number of points they need to produce in history or math or whatever, and they're independently working at their own pace through any one of those strands, and getting those points is you either solve that problem and prove that you did it, or you don't, and you don't move forward. You don't move forward until you actually figure it out. So you get an A or you keep on going.
Right.
But the idea is that Pythagorean theorem is points 140 through 160 are all the things that are related to that, of little tests and little things that you have to do to prove that you understand how to use it. But you're not. So you're not, grade 6 is not this whole collection, because some kids are going slower and faster in other ways. So the idea is that you might be here in one place in history, and somewhere far behind that in math, and somewhere in the between in English. And as a student, you're going through all of those independently.
Well, in fact, that's what happens, whether the school fosters it or not.
Right.
But if you have one teacher for 30 kids, and there are 30 different levels and 30 different subjects, how do you solve that?
Well, for us, it's going from what I would call man-to-man education to zone. So, so zone defense. And so what you're doing is, instead of having, what we're playing around with is instead of having a teacher teaching, a certain group of students, they're teaching students that are in that level, and we're not doing it all in person. We're doing it as a mixture. So a teacher may represent this, once again, a teacher or a group of teachers may be teaching points 140 to 160. So all the students, when they get to that point in their development, they're working with those teachers, and that teacher may be local to them, and maybe
that's where technology
remote.
helps, gives you that capability.
All of the stuff I'm talking about would be absolutely impossible without technology, without a lot of technology. It's not something that you could do on paper, so it's not something we could have done even 10 years ago.
Right.
But when you look at that, with the new systems, the learning management systems that are coming out, and what I would call the next generation learning management systems like Exploros and so on and so forth, we will know where students are, what they read, how long it took them to read it, if they had to recheck a step. There's an enormous amount of granular information about the students that helps us know whether they're succeeding or not succeeding. Where you end up spending most of your resources is you get out of the way of the students that are succeeding, because you have video and lecture, and question and answer for them, and you spend most of your resources on the students that are not succeeding in that area, because that's where because you can spend the students like me when I was in school.
You didn't need
all
help.
you do is just get out
of the way.
Keep your hands away from the moving parts. I didn't need any help to go through that, but there were definitely students that need it. And what you end up with right now is this kind of mediocre mush, where there's a small amount of students that get what they need. They have students like me that are just, I spent most of my time making sure I didn't have to take any homework home. I do last session's homework. Like I would do math homework in English class, and then I would do English homework in German class, because it was, I only had to listen halfway to, to keep up. And so the
do you feel like schools failed you though?
I don't think schools failed me. I think that I hate to say it this way, but
you didn't really need
it successfully stayed out of my way.
Yeah.
Like it was. I don't mean to say it that way, but it was like it was my mom.
I'm not worried about the kid like you. I'm worried about the other kids, frankly.
No, I agree.
Kids like you are going to take care of yourself.
Which is why I think that you want to have something that's much more granular that doesn't lose them. And so, and it was, so I think that is the important thing. And I'm not interested in, I also don't think that the answer is getting rid of summers and reducing and increasing homework. And I mean, I have to admit, my son now is, he's now in kindergarten. And the fact that he's in kindergarten and getting homework, I'm pretty edgy about.
That's crazy.
Like, I'm just like, really?
No, that's
really?
crazy.
And it's.
What possible homework could there be?
There's things he has to do now. So anyway,
No, I'm with you on that. That's a bad trend, and I think that's because we have these test standards and these curricula standards that teachers and schools.
But I think we could meet those standards. I really think we can meet them, but I think that what we're trying to do is take a car that can only go 30 miles an hour and make it go 50 miles an hour, where what we need to do is create a car that can go 80 miles an hour and have it running at 50 miles an hour. And I think that when we look at embedding technology into that process, but I mean wholesale, like I'm not, like the stuff we're doing, and what we're doing in Rwanda is much different than what we would do here, maybe. But
well, Rwanda could be a test tube for you, but this is all very blue sky. I mean, you're not thinking. Do you talk to educators in the States? Are there people interested in what you're learning?
There's definitely people interested. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely people interested in what we're doing here.
How did you get interested in Africa?
When I was 10, my great grandmother died, and everybody got something. And what I ended up with was a suitcase of National Geographics from the 20s and 30s. And and so I went through them all. And as a kid, I was like, I'd go through them, and they had all these old ads and everything else. But they had this thing when they were really just discovering Africa, and so there was all these, just all the cultures
continent.
So I became very fascinated with it. And then it was interesting. Then I watched. I remember when I was like 15 or 16. I watched The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Great movie.
It really was this interesting thought that a culture that we think of as primitive would have something to offer us, And so then I became very interested in Southern Africa, mostly because The Gods Must Be Crazy, and then got very interested in Zimbabwe, and spent a lot of time studying Zimbabwe because it was very interesting. It was very interesting in the 90s, and still interesting, but
politically.
There was a lot of things going on in the 90s, in the transition, 80s and 90s, and so studied all over Africa, and knew that that's where I wanted to do what we were doing. I wanted to prove that you could, as we got into the mid-90s, I wanted to be able to prove that you could build an economy on top of media production. And
why is that? Here's a cup of coffee for you.
Thank
you. Rick has brewed you a fine cup of Joe.
These are always so good. Anyway, so I think more that I wanted to prove that you could build an economy on media production. I thought that was an industry that would be very interesting to build, because I think it's the future. I think there's trillions of dollars of work that's going to be required as we move into visualizing everything, expecting everything to show up, visualized, expecting all of these things.
But you don't want to create a sweatshop of inexpensive African labor to serve our media creation needs.
No, I don't think that. I don't think it needs to be I definitely don't think it needs to be a sweatshop, but it's also not going to be $80 an hour.
Right.
And so the thing is,
but they don't need $80 an hour.
They don't. And so but I think that it is a matter of providing the opportunity for people to be able to, and I think that's very interesting for me, for someone in the emerging world to have access to producing a lot of content that we see all over the world, rather than it all being exported out of the United States.
Well, I really like what you said, and of course it goes back to that principle, the first mission statement of the global conversation, where everybody has a voice.
Right.
The point is, it's democratizing of media.
Well, and when all media comes from, and this is, I think, part of the resistance we have in the Middle East and many parts of the world, is when all the media that goes out to the rest of the world is coming from the West, or more specifically from the United States. And it really is. When you go overseas, all this media is being injected into all this.
We're telling their stories for them.
Well, and essentially what we're doing is cultural clear cutting.
Yes.
Because we're just wiping out cultures, because they are, they think that the United States looks like LA. They think that that's the way everybody lives, and that's the way they want to live, and they lose their own culture. And there's a lot of things that when we start clear cutting all that culture, we lose a lot, because they had a lot to offer in a way that is a lot of wisdom to inject back into that conversation that we're not going to ever see. And so giving them the tools to be able to produce their own content, I think, is very important. And so anyway, so then a lot of that was theory until I actually got to Zimbabwe and spent 2 weeks there in 2000. And it was all something I was doing for them until I got there. And then when I got so much out of it that it became just
I remember you coming
obsessive.
back and talking about how these sculptors who were working in stone were already doing 3D design. It's just that it was in stone, and they took very quickly to the computer tools. And I remember how excited you were, and you'd bring back sculptures, and it was really it's exciting.
Well, and it was
a real discovery.
It was, and it's I think that
I love that it wasn't there to help them anymore. It was an exchange. It was a mutual exchange.
To me, it's an opportunity. Like I get excited about the opportunity that I get to, that I have the luxury of being able to go to Africa and be with incredible people, whether it's in Zimbabwe or Tanzania or Rwanda. I mean, I'm always so amazed and so proud of my students in Rwanda. You know, I'm doing classes now in Rwanda from here. So I teach classes using Google Plus Hangouts and GoToMeeting. And so they have two screens. One is the GoToMeeting has the screen of my computer, and then I'm on the other one. And
That's great.
I have a two-way conversation with them, and I'm doing that now 2 to 3 times a week. And
I've seen the pictures of your students. They look so happy and excited to be there.
And they're very focused. I mean, and excited about the process.
So tell us some about, we only have a few more minutes, but about some of the things you're planning and places you're going in.
Well, I think that obviously, you know, what we're doing in the production, on the production end of what my company does, we really are experimenting in the realm of what we would call complex live events or these interactive events.
You've expanded phenomenally in the last year.
It's been a little intense.
And we see it because Alex, Pixel Core is right next door in this building, and then you have part of the basement too. And I could just see all the stuff going on and the new employees. You got offices down the street now. You've got an office in Washington, D.C. It's just blowing up.
It's gotten a little out of hand. Yeah, we were brought in by Google a while ago to do Hangouts. Why don't they do it? Well, I mean, I think that
I think they'd be the experts.
It's very common to do. It's very common to hire external for any large company,
like a production
rather than
team.
building a specialist team. It's hard to get someone to work for you in the same level of we meld the perfect team for everything they need.
Right.
Or everything, a lot of it.
And that's camera operators, digital technologists,
satellite trucks, and
there's
fiber.
a lot of stuff that Google doesn't want to get involved in.
They'd rather just pay someone.
Somebody else
to do
has
that
the
for
expertise.
them.
You come do it.
Right. And we have a lot of other companies, mostly Fortune 500 companies, that want to do these complex live events. And so what we do is we figure out how to do them. And sometimes they're Hangouts, and sometimes they're Skype, and sometimes they're fiber, and sometimes they're satellite trucks. And what we have at DC is this big interconnect that allows us to interconnect all those different technologies in any way, shape, or form.
It's kind of a hub and a wheel that there are spokes from all over.
You can take any kind of media and then tie it so that anyone from any one of those types can talk to each other, kind of thing. So anyway, we'll keep on building.
Where did you get that expertise?
What was interesting is that we were trying to figure out how to train Pixel Core members, because we've been doing the Pixel Core training for a decade or over a decade. And we were trying to figure out how to train them. And so we were trying to figure out how to create these events for the
So you started doing it internally?
Internally, just trying to fix, and it just turned out we developed this capacity of how do we create interactive events, because we were trying to interact with our members.
Right.
And what's interesting now is that we're about to relaunch the online Pixel Core.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we'll be...
Because for a while, memberships were closed.
And we're about to open them back up for March.
Oh, good.
And so, and what's going to happen, though, is that it's going to start off small, and we're going to actually integrate people who want to learn Photoshop and other things like that, and it'll be very easy. So if you were just getting started, it would be comfortable. But you'll be interacting with. We'll be doing the classes that we're already doing in Rwanda, but you'll actually get to watch the stream and ask questions and be part of that conversation and be part of the same things that they're doing. But what's interesting is that it's coming full circle now, because we did all these things so we could do education. Then we got so busy doing production for everyone else that we stopped doing that, and now we're about to come back to
education,
which is good for me because it means I have to travel less, which is
you travel a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
You used to be here all the time, and now you come and go, come and go.
It's been about 250 days last year and almost 300,000 miles of flying, and so I'm looking forward to a slower life to some degree.
We would love very much to get you back here more often.
I am working very hard at that. So it's
I'm sure Carlita and the kids would feel the same way.
Yep.
Alex, it's it's nice to have some time to chat and to talk. We feel really fortunate. You're a wonderful resource to have next door, but also a really great friend of the network. And a lot of what Twit does, Macbreak's a very good example, started as a Pixel Core production. And then I guess you kept video and we took audio, or I can't even remember what happened.
Yeah, it was
way back when.
It was just very clear that that Macbreak would be much more successful. The discussion, the Macbreak Weekly, will be much more successful as a Twit product. Than
Do you still do podcasts, though, right?
We do. I haven't. So we have TWIP, which Frederick Johnson does most of it. This Week in Photography. And we're talking now that I'm slowing down, we'll start turning them all back on again. So we had turned This Week in Media off.
That would be great to bring back.
Yeah. And,
Daisy?
Possibly with Daisy if she wants
She's
to
available.
do it. So yeah. So the but we're going to be turning on Gear Media Tech. Macbreak Video, all those things are going to turn on throughout the summer. So.
Gear Media Tech was a lot of fun, and I did a few of those with you. We did them as a live events, partly, where people could learn how to do this kind of stuff. And
we're going to start experimenting, taking all the things we've learned from all these interactive live events, and possibly do another Gear Media Tech. And I'll, of course, try to get you to...
I'll be glad. But, I think it's really interesting how Hangouts has changed a lot. It has really, from Google's point of... Google put this product out that made it possible, really, for anybody... for free to do a high-quality video production that's stored on YouTube, is available anytime.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a really empowering technology, and I don't know, I think I'm already starting to see a lot of creativity come out of that.
There's a lot of...
It's pretty cool.
A lot of crazy things you can do with it once you start to play with it. So it's... I do want to say, I don't think I get to say this very often, but, I really feel like, our work with Twit and my work with you has been just... key to a lot of the things.
That's true, but
it
it's
is
so fun to have this laboratory next door. You're almost our blue sky R&D. Well, and I don't have to pay for it. This lab next door, and we go next door and we say, "So, Alex, what's the best streaming solution?" "Oh, you need to buy a $25,000 elemental." "Okay, let's talk to you later." And it does, and it works.
It does work.
We did. They go, "Ah." So we did. Alex Lindsay, it's such a wonderful, a mitzvah to have you as a friend and to have you next door and to be able to talk to you. Thank you for all that you do, and I think you're really making a big difference in the world.
Well, thank you.
It's really fun to watch that, and we'll see you. I was going to bring the Mac Pro so you could take it home. I'll go get it for you.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll see you soon on Macbreak Weekly.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Pixelcore.com starting in March, opening up.
Yeah, you should follow me on
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, on Twitter and also on G+, and I'll start announcing more, and I'll announce some stuff on Macbreak as well.
Good. That's exciting.
We're trying to finish the online form and everything else, which should be done next week.
Well, I see what happened is you kind of got distracted by all this business that started flowing in.
And we've slowly hired enough people that I can start going back to focusing on those things. I mean, I still have to focus on production, but I'm not going to have to travel as much.
Yeah. We do Triangulation now at our new time. It's Monday afternoon, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern time. That's 2100 UTC. If you're watching anywhere else in the world, do the calculation. You can figure it out. Live is great because then I can see the chat room and you can join us and ask questions of our guests. But if you can't watch live, on-demand audio and video available, always free after the fact. twit.tv/TRI. We have a Triangulation channel on YouTube. And, of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your netcasts, iTunes or Stitcher, that kind of thing. And you get it every week that way. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Triangulation.